The Caribbean. Once the center of pirates and colonial empires, this region is now the stage of a new power struggle. Long seen as the US's backyard, this tropical paradise is now facing the growing influence of China. The US has warned that the Caribbean could turn into a Chinese lake amid Beijing's growing influence in the region. But is the Caribbean really becoming a China lake? Today we will examine how the balance of power is shifting in this strategic region and its implications for global politics.
We start this hour at the White House. The Trump administration facing new tariffs today as trade wars with some of our closest trading allies continue to escalate.
The Chinese foreign minister took it back the next day. This is Friday. That's really good news. The Chinese don't often do that. They're often quite arrogant and proud of what they say.
Donald Trump, it's that he loves tariffs.
The word tariff, properly used, is a beautiful word.
I always say tariffs is the most beautiful word to me in the dictionary.
The historical roots of this rivalry go back to the post-colonial era in the Americas and are embodied in the Monroe Doctrine, which shaped US influence over the Caribbean. On December 2, 1823, President James Monroe delivered his 7th State of the Union address before Congress, using the opportunity to advance what would later become known as the Monroe Doctrine. After a number of former Spanish colonies in the Americas declared their independence, Monroe said that the United States would oppose further plundering of the region by European empires to protect the newly liberated states. As American power exploded in the 19th and early 20th centuries, the Monroe Doctrine evolved and increasingly came to mean that Washington opposed any potentially hostile foreign power that established itself in America. With this and more diverse commercial motives in mind, the US has engaged in a series of military interventions in Latin America and the Caribbean. China's economic moves in recent years have begun to challenge this doctrine. Over the last decade, its economic and diplomatic influence in the region has grown significantly, with one foreign policy expert saying that Beijing wants to turn the Caribbean Sea into a Chinese lake. There are also concerns that cuts to the US Agency for International Development, USAID, since President Donald Trump's administration took over in January, could weaken American influence in the Caribbean. One regional expert called it a big gift to Beijing. In a statement, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi emphasized that China's cooperation with Latin American and Caribbean LAC countries prioritizes mutual support and solidarity over geopolitical interests. Wang said that China adheres to the principles of equality and mutual benefit in its relations with LAC countries, and has never sought a sphere of influence or targeted any party. He also said that the cooperation between China and LAC countries meets the expectations of the people, responds to the needs of the countries in the region, and provides reliable options for development and revitalization. Wang added that what people in LAC countries want is to build their own house, not to be somebody's backyard. What they want is independence and self-determination, not the Monroe Doctrine. As Wang noted, cooperation between China and Latin America and the Caribbean, LAC, strengthens the emphasis on independence and self-determination of the people in the region. In this context, the strategic importance of the Caribbean has a significant impact on its relations with the United States. The Caribbean is of strategic importance for the maritime route approach to the southeast of the United States. The region serves as an important hub and transit point for commercial logistics between the east coast of the United States and the Atlantic coasts of Central and South America. The Caribbean is strongly connected to the United States through trade, geographic location, and cultural ties. With its central location in the Caribbean, Puerto Rico is strategically located between the Dominican Republic and the Leeward Antilles Islands. Islands such as Cuba, Haiti, and the Dominican Republic play a key role in US security policies. Against this historical background, how is China's growing presence in the Caribbean taking shape? China is the main geopolitical rival of the United States, which has seen its economic power explode in the last decade. Data from the World Trade Organization showed that the value of Chinese manufacturing specialists will reach $1.81 trillion in 2023, 30 times higher than in 2002, while America's global trade deficit will be over $1.2 trillion. China's trade and investment in Central America and the Caribbean has expanded rapidly over the past few years. These investments in infrastructure projects, port construction, and the energy sector are transforming the region's economies. China's trade with the Caribbean grew from $1 billion in 2002 to $8 billion in 2019, with Chinese exports totaling $6.1 billion, imports totaling $1.9 billion, according to figures from the House of Representatives Foreign Affairs Committee. The committee identified major Chinese projects, including the development of a $3 billion deepwater port in Grand Bahama, just 55 miles from the U.S. mainland, and a $600 million investment to upgrade the Dominican Republic's power grid. According to Forbes, China is financing projects worth $2.1 billion in Jamaica and $773 million in Suriname. By 2022, 10 Caribbean countries had signed up to Beijing's Belt and Road Initiative, a massive Chinese economic program that critics claim is a Trojan horse for geopolitical ambitions. Cuba, Suriname, Guyana, Trinidad and Tobago, Grenada, Barbados, Dominica, Antigua and Barbuda, Dominican Republic and Jamaica. China is also engaging in cooperation with Caribbean countries, such as military training programs and equipment support. This is affecting the geopolitical balance in the region. Evan Ellis, a research professor specializing in the relationship between Latin America and China at the U.S. Army War College's Institute for Strategic Studies, said that while individual Chinese companies are primarily commercial targets, Beijing is closely following the broader strategic picture. While I do not believe that Chinese companies have a presence in the region primarily for military value, the military opportunities that such commercial presence and political and military relations potentially provide in wartime are clear to the People's Liberation Army and the Chinese government, Ellis said. And he added, on a per capita basis, there is no other region of the Western Hemisphere that receives so many trips for police and defense force officials to two Chinese military institutions. Gifts of police and military equipment and supplies, visits by Chinese hospital ships, and other People's Liberation Army military diplomacy, such as in the Caribbean. Alan Mendoza, executive director of the Henry Jackson Society, a London-based security think tank, said Beijing is actively seeking to challenge the United States in the Caribbean. China seems intent on turning the Caribbean Sea into a Chinese lake through its strategic investments and attempts to exert influence in the region, Mendoza said. The Trump administration could easily use a carrot and stick approach to undo this by offering its own trade and investment incentives while making clear the consequences of ignoring a generous offer. John Lee, a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute think tank, who served as senior national security advisor to Australia's foreign minister from 2016 to 2018, said China's activities pose a threefold threat to U.S. influence in the Caribbean and Latin America. First, the growing economic, financial, and technological dependence on China offers Beijing the opportunity to influence geopolitical decisions and even the domestic politics of small states. Second, China is seeking to redefine and change the rules and standards that nations use to conduct trade and commerce in its favor, he said. Third, China's development and operation of ports in foreign countries has been used by Beijing to gather important military and economic intelligence to aid China's geopolitical competition with the United States. These geopolitical influences encompass not only the economic, but also the military dimensions of China's global strategy. And the Taiwan issue is one of the most critical points on Beijing's path to achieving its goals. Chinese President Xi Jinping has called the reunification of Taiwan, an island democracy of 23 million people that Beijing considers a breakaway province, with mainland China inevitable and ruled out using force to resolve the issue. Christopher Sabatini, a Latin America expert at the London-based think tank Chatham House, said the intensity of China's intervention in the Caribbean and Central America was partly an attempt to persuade countries to cut ties with Taiwan. Before the recent diplomatic initiatives, if you look at the countries that recognize Taiwan, the overwhelming majority of them were in the Caribbean and Central America, so it was an obvious target for their economic and diplomatic efforts, Sabatini said. In 2018, Panama and the Dominican Republic cut long-standing diplomatic ties with Taiwan, followed by Nicaragua in 2021. Sabatini said China has a long-term strategy to line up countries that will support it in multilateral organizations, adding, this was not an immediate military threat. There was a larger long-term plan to pick a team, to stack chips. Ellis made a similar point. 5 of the 12 countries in the world that recognize Taiwan over the People's Republic of China are located in the Caribbean basin at a moment when removing Taiwan's sources of international legitimacy is of increasing importance to President Xi Jinping. In addition to its global strategic moves on Taiwan, China is also increasing its influence in other critical points in the Caribbean to boost its regional power, including the strategic importance of the Panama Canal. China's influence has grown significantly over the last decade around the strategically vital Panama Canal, with 2 of the 5 ports near its entrance operated by Hong Kong-based companies. This has infuriated Trump, who has pledged to return the canal to American ownership after it was transferred in 1999 following a 1977 agreement. Speaking at his inauguration in January, Trump said, "First of all, China runs the Panama Canal, and we didn't give it to China, we gave it to Panama, and we're taking it back." Trump also ruled out using force to regain control of the canal. Ellis said China's influence around the canal could give China opportunities to disrupt canal traffic in wartime through physical or electronic attacks on locks, disabling a large ship in the Culebra Cut, digging up the canal, or other activities. But Sabatini cautioned against exaggerating the threat from Chinese ports near the canal, saying, "The reality is that much of the intelligence that could have been gathered through satellite imagery, or even by setting up listening posts. These were not insidious outposts of Chinese military influence." In a victory for the US president, Hong Kong-based CK Hutchison Holdings, which owns 2 ports along the Panama Canal, announced it was selling them to an American BlackRock-led buyout in a $23 billion deal. Apart from strategic issues such as Taiwan and the Panama Canal, China's growing influence in the region has also led to significant shifts in security and domestic policy areas such as immigration. There has been an increase in the number of encounters between suspected Chinese illegal immigrants and US law enforcement at both the Mexican and Canadian borders. According to a May 2024 report by the House of Representatives Subcommittee on Homeland Security Oversight, Investigations and Accountability, this figure rose from 1,970 in fiscal year 2022 to 24,376 2 years later. Trump has made curbing illegal immigration one of his main policy priorities. Sabatini said he sees mass migration from China's southern border, through failed states in Latin America and the Caribbean, as a way to tie up American resources that might otherwise be deployed elsewhere. In the case of Haiti or other failed states, China and Russia are very happy to see these states continue to collapse to send migrants, insecurity, and addictive substances to the United States, Sabatini said. So they don't actually have to intervene militarily. There's basically a series of dumpster fires on the doorstep of the United States: Venezuela, Nicaragua, Cuba, and of course now Haiti. In the event of an open war between the US and China, Sabatini said, what they're counting on Latin America for is to be able to lock down a theater of operations. What they want to do is to make sure that they can confine the US to its southern border. We are not talking about an invasion. We are talking about reducing US operations in the conflict zone. China's growing influence in the region has also led to a reduction in US development assistance. This in turn weakens the US strategic position in the region through cuts in USAID funding. In this context, the Trump administration has reduced staff at the US Agency for International Development, USAID, and the head of the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, Elon Musk, has indicated that it will be shut down completely. According to the Congressional Research Service, the Biden administration has requested $2.2 billion in USAID assistance for the Caribbean and Latin America in fiscal year 2025, so these cuts could significantly impact US influence in the region. Sabatini said this would reduce US influence in the Caribbean and Central America to the benefit of competitors like China, calling the move an own goal and a huge gift to Beijing. He said the move sends a signal that the US is not interested in just extending a hand, and that China will likely move to take advantage. He also noted that civil society groups such as independent media and educational organizations in authoritarian Beijing-friendly countries such as Nicaragua, Cuba, and Venezuela were big recipients of USAID. That has now disappeared, Sabatini said. Now, none of the NGOs that received money are suddenly going to embrace the Chinese. But cutting that money gave the Chinese a big gift because these are Chinese allies. It's an own goal. They gave the field to the autocrats. Professor Eric Hirschberg, an expert on Latin American politics who teaches at American University in Washington, D.C., said China's growing influence is partly a response to the failure of the U.S. to provide what the Caribbean and Central America need. Despite intermittent commitments to partner with countries in the region around these needs, the U.S. government has not been a reliable source for access to large investments, and neither U.S. trade nor U.S. aid to the region, while important in some cases, comes remotely close to what is needed for these countries to be minimally well off, he said. In this context, the significant commitments made by Chinese investors in recent years, particularly in infrastructure, are vital for the prospects for prosperity in Central America and the Caribbean. However, China's influence in Latin America is not limited to economic cooperation, but is triggering a deeper transformation process that is fundamentally altering power dynamics in the region. China's investment policies and infrastructure projects are reshaping the processes of development and independence in these countries. At this point, America's review of its strategies in the region, and in particular how it responds to China's rising influence, will be the decisive factor in future political and economic orientations. These developments could have far-reaching repercussions, not only for states in the region, but also globally. To understand this situation, we need to take a closer look at how America needs to reconfigure its historical advantages, and how this transformation might be received by the countries of the region. The United States has more free trade architecture in Latin America than in any other region of the world. It has a number of development agencies at its disposal to mobilize investment and private sector interests, such as the U.S. Development Finance Corporation. And it has the most voting power to catalyze investment in multilateral financial institutions such as the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and the Inter-American Development Bank. As the United States seeks to restrict Chinese investment and activity in key sectors, it needs to bring viable and cost-competitive alternatives to the table. Otherwise, countries in the region may consider American proposals as mere moral lessons but see no tangible benefit. Sometimes these alternatives may be of American origin, but often they will not be. In this context, the United States should make greater efforts to attract Japanese, Korean, Taiwanese, and European investors in sectors where they are unlikely to invest, or where countries in the region can exploit their comparative advantages. The new administration will face a very challenging international agenda. Resolving conflicts in many different regions will require a great deal of energy and political determination. However, China's growing influence in the United States' neighborhood is still a major intimidation. Everyone knows how fast China has been gaining power in the region in recent years. There are still opportunities to step back and reassert American power in the region. The Trump administration should be able to put the U.S. on a more balanced footing to compete